So Tyson Fury has seen every style: movers, punchers, southpaws, monsters. But Andy Ruiz is a different problem. Fast hands, heavy counters, and no fear. The pocket is where Fury normally controls chaos. Against Ruiz, that chaos bites back. Think of this. Sometimes the nightmare is not the giant in front of you, but the smaller man inside range. So there are two things to mention here. Number one, why Tyson Fury should avoid, Andy Ruiz. That's the first thing. And secondly, who should Tyson Fury fight next? And I think that Andy Ruiz could be a potentially very difficult fight for Tyson Fury. But let's break this down. Let's analyze this. Let's break it down in phases. So phase one, Andy Ruiz has speed, and that speed is deceptive. Phase two, Andy Ruiz has power, enough power to bother and to hurt Tyson Fury. So you have the speed and the power. Phase three, Andy Ruiz is a very good counterpuncher, and he illustrated that against Anthony Joshua. And finally, phase four, Andy Ruiz has shocked the world before. What does that mean? It means he's comfortable as the underdog. He's comfortable within that psychology. Now, Evander Holyfield, yes, the legend Evander Holyfield, the former undisputed cruiserweight and former undisputed heavyweight champion, spoke very highly of Ruiz. And I believe that Evander sparred Ruiz a lot later in his career. Also remember that Ruiz gave Joseph Parker a very good fight. And before the Fabio fight, Joseph Parker was seen as the best challenge to Usyk, or at least one of the best challenges to Usyk. And Ruiz showed caliber in the fight against Joseph Parker. He showed his pedigree. He showed that he was on a high level. He showed boxing intelligence. Now, I will make the clarification that this was a different Parker to the Parker today, but it was still a good Parker. Parker is a good fighter. So if Tyson Fury fights Andy Ruiz, if he does fight Andy Ruiz and he stands in the pocket with Andy Ruiz, this could get very interesting because the speed, the power, and the counter-punching would put Andy Ruiz in a very, very strong position. And I guess the counter-argument is relatively obvious because you have that statement or the question, isn't Andy Ruiz in very poor form? Is he not the same fighter, or he isn't the same fighter that beat AJ in that first performance? And some may look at the Miller fight, the Gerald Miller fight, and say he wasn't that great. And perhaps that performance wasn't great. But there's a few things to consider here. First off, let's not undermine Miller, because after his loss to Dubois, people have minimized him as a force. Let's be objectively correct. At one point, Miller was very dangerous. He had tempo, conditioning, and his punch resistance was impressive. Well, to say that he had tempo is not actually painting the picture. I mean, he could throw so many punches around, and it looks like, based on his recent form, that he may have returned to form. But even if we concede that the Miller performance was subpar, if we make that concession, we could be misleading the context of how dangerous Andy Ruiz is. Here is a perspective. The motivation levels for Ruiz will be different if the fight with Tyson Fury is made. The camp potentially will be different, and therefore the context of the fight will be different. So the context against Miller, if we make the concession, is different to the context against Tyson Fury. Here's another premise. Motivation can excel a boxer's performance. When a boxer is motivated, they can excel. So, for example, if Andy Ruiz beats Tyson Fury, his whole world changes. His whole world dramatically changes. And for that reason, when you have the motivation and the talent, Andy Ruiz could be a huge problem. In other words, when we're making the summary, the risk-reward ratio is just simply too high. If Tyson Fury wins, he is supposed to win. But if Andy Ruiz wins, Tyson Fury's career may be finished. So who should Tyson Fury fight next? Of course, we want the AJ fight. That's a massive fight, a huge fight, a phenomenal fight. But I believe he's going to take another tune-up. So who should that tune-up be? Or I shouldn't say tune-up. He's going to take another fight. So who should that fight be? Let's rule out a few names. And again, this is just a subjective perspective. I think we should rule out Moses Atama because he is simply too dangerous. So I think Tyson Fury is using his name. He's using his name for marketing purposes. So rule out Moses Atama, too dangerous, high risk, low reward. Dillian Whyte, again, Dillian Whyte, rightly or wrongly, is perceived as damaged. He's perceived to be at the end of his career. Therefore, the risk is too high. And I think it's disproportionate. And then you've got Deontay Wilder. This fight will have great marketing, but they've already fought 3 times. And I don't know how important that fight would be. And that fight would carry a huge risk because of Deontay Wilder's power. So from my perspective, from an outsider looking in, I think there's 2 names that could be considered. And these would not be tune-up fights. These would be hard fights. The first is Jarrell Miller. Very dangerous volume puncher, but does not have the power and speed and counter-punching ability of Andy Ruiz. And for that reason, I think it would be a tough test, but a test that he could overcome, assuming he's back to form. And then we have Joe Joyce, where you have the British familiarity, a dangerous jab, but unfortunately, dangerously poor reflexes. I think the Joe Joyce fight stands out here. Yes, when we look at Joe Joyce, he has the height, but the lack of reflexes and speed makes him less of a threat. And I would say his defensive responsibilities are slightly lacking, and that's being respectful. In that context, in the Joe Joyce context, Tyson Fury holds all the cards. Higher boxing IQ, better jab, better feet, better adaptability. He just simply holds all the cards. And the British familiarity could make it very welcoming. I feel like the British fans would really engage with that. Of course, people would criticize the event. People would criticize the Joe Joyce fight. But I believe that they will tune in. Who is they? They, the boxing public. They will tune in. And there is still a risk. And the risk is predicated on the height and the ambition. Joe Joyce will come into that, I believe, with ambitions to win. But, there's a big but, the lack of speed, the lack of adaptability, that significantly reduces the risk. It's still a tough fight, but it's a fight that generates revenue and will give you rounds and enough conflict, I believe, to keep the fans engaged. So what does Tyson Fury need to do? Again, this is just from my perspective. And from my perspective, I think Tyson Fury needs to keep sharpening those reflexes. Keep sharpening those reflexes. He needs to rediscover and build on that boxing IQ. He needs to master the feint again. We need to see the accuracy and the confidence, because when he has that confidence and the accuracy, that's when we see the switch hitting. And here is the truth, or this is my truth. That first Usyk performance, it was very, very impressive. Yes, he lost, but you can still lose a fight and have a great performance. You could argue quite convincingly that Tyson Fury would have probably beaten any other boxer in the division that night. And you know that when Tyson Fury is feinting well, when he's throwing that short left hook and then throwing the right hook to the body, avoiding the counter, or throwing that short left hook and throwing that straight right to the head and then avoiding the counter, then you know he's back to serious business. And that's what we need. We need Tyson Fury to be optimal. We need him to get back to what he was. Because if he gets back to what he was, then Tyson Fury is an elite fighter. You know, I remember Tyson Fury when he fought Klitschko. And I remember not just the performance, but I remember the psychology, the build-up to the fight. I feel like he beat Klitschko psychologically in a sense, and then he won the fight, and it was a very technical fight. And Peter Fury guided that victory. I believe he was a big part of that victory. And then obviously you had the Deontay Wilder fights, which were great moments in boxing. And I guess we're coming to this point, right, where the story of Tyson Fury It's like it's coming to an end. And the boxing chapter is close. It's close to finishing. And I guess even though it's close to finishing, we can hold on to the fact that there are still opportunities. There are opportunities for some more epic moments. And I think we can say this with certainty. Tyson Fury is a great boxer. And his team need to create a great boxing environment for him to prosper again. And I think a lot of us want to see him prosper again because he has such talent. And like I said, he's had some great moments and was a great champion. Think of this: with dedication, the right boxing environment, the right strategy, and a little luck, the door to greatness can open again. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested. I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, all you have to do is simply like and subscribe. And if you want to watch more of this content, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.